Yeah, that's great. So the way I do it is, or well, I don't do it. I mean, it just happens that I feel
Mm,
that it feels like I'm in this place, and what is it
mm,
that I see, and I know the people, and now I'm trying to explain it to someone who doesn't know the things, right? So a bit like
yeah.
I'm the anthropologist here, and I try to explain things to other people. I try to explain what's going on. It is also like not just seeing, but also, what does it feel like?
Mm,
And also in terms of, physical perception. So that's why for me, it was
mm,
important to describe the, I thought the very strong winds. I had read or heard about that in one of
mm,
the, you know, documentaries. And I thought, oh, that is important when people walk out. That's what they feel. That hits them,
mm,
but also that restricts them in certain ways. And so for me, it's always a bit like that. So it feels like I'm there, right?
mm, mm.
Um, which is quite nice, because it makes me think about what are the kind of things that people experience and that are important to say, and to write down, and which ones are just nice to write down, and maybe they're not important, and I just lead people onto a garden path. And
Sure,
so,
sure. I think in some ways I might have an over idealized idea of the place as well. I mean, I think these conversations around dystopian science fiction, this whole idea of this character starting off at what is an observatory, astronomical observatory, and then sort of connecting with these people who are, important for her in her life, her mother, teacher, and then I've always kind of, I think I'd watched some documentary on Steven Spielberg where all of his characters are 12-year-olds. Because at that age you have this like wonder of like,
mm,
and I think in some ways maybe the character's a bit older, but I kind of maybe see her as sort of having this real wonder and then being quite easily like not corrupted, but like her friend is like, come, let's go and explore. And I think this idea of sort of exploring the world without the first contact story, I think there's enough of a story there. Um, and and that's sort of this question around sort of a template for how how culture would develop if the culture started in one, and it's maybe just on a, it's like for ease, say it's the northern top of the planet, and then it would essentially, this intelligent species would kind of move around until, and like in this planet they haven't reached the bottom yet, right? So they're still separate and they still are not sure how far the planet goes and where it goes. Um, and then the character is essentially going to get to the end of where civilization has gotten to, continue to go forward, and then find the other side of the civilization on the other side, and be the person who works out that they're, like, this is how the world is.
mm,
The world is round, and they're on this ring as well. Um,
yeah.
but this sort of shift in idea of perception. But if I think about it, it always seems to make sense to me that there's this old town, or and and the people who stay in this old town, and like maybe slightly, I don't know why I kind of think maybe just from an Earth reference, like a conservative idea of how things could be done, and then the people who sort of venture out, either people venturing out to get away from either not being able to express their freedoms. I mean, again, sort of the Earth thing of like either religious freedom or opportunity, or just the idea to explore. Um, and then kind of as you get further and further away, people are like less and less bound by this idea of what's happening in the old town, and then sort of at the edges are like the fringes of this sort of this species. And I think that's sort of, for me in my head, that's kind of the journey. It's the journey from this very safe but not very exciting place into a place where it maybe gets an opportunity for her to reflect back on what she thinks of this her home and what the people there think about themselves and about others. But then also I kind of see it more as an adventure story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the idea. So when I when I read your outline and also heard more of your ideas now, it kind of more and more to me sounds like, yes, an adventure story, really exciting one, because you can play around with a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
things, right? So, what does the end of their civilization look like?
Mm-hmm.
Will there be other wildlife that they encounter?
Sure.
What's the vegetation like? Will there be some sort of geological thing that separates the
Uh,
area so that it makes it maybe difficult to go from, the
sure.
ends of civilization any further? Maybe that's why civilization stops.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but also once they get to the other place, which I kind of think of as Cleo's place, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, so I think that to me sounds a bit like, oh, we're discovering America all over again, bit, right? So
Sure.
suddenly
Sure.
they have their mindset and move
Uh-huh.
into a place that perhaps is completely different. So I think when you just in
Uh-huh.
your first three chapters, it sounded like you're describing, was it houses or buildings
Uh-huh.
that were out, like, on top of the ground, right? Whereas Cleo was sort of more living underground, right? So
Sure.
maybe
Sure.
when they arrive, they don't actually see much, and maybe
Uh-huh.
they think of the people initially as cave people.
Uh-huh.
Um, of course, because they've been separated for so long, they will share certain things, because so sort of in my head is maybe, a long, long, long time ago, some of the ancestors
Uh-huh.
have distributed all around, and then they were separated for some reason. Nobody remembers that because it's such a long time ago, right?
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And so they kind of look sort of similar. They won't have tentacles, right?
Sure.
But
Sure.
they still are different in the way they look, right? And so maybe the new arrivals will at first get so their first impression might be, I don't know, yeah, perhaps the wrong one, right? Or
Uh-huh.
will be
Sure.
kind of informed by their pre by the knowledge they already carry with them, right? By their cultural knowledge, basically.
Mhm.
But then as they get to know the other group better, it will slowly kind of dissolve, and they will,
Mhm.
more and more understand each other. And the reason why I find that interesting is, first of all, because that's technically what should happen if intercultural communication works well.
Mhm.
Um, there are a few kind of frameworks we can play around with,
Mhm.
that kind of explain why there might be differences and how these differences can be overcome.
Amazing.
Um, but it might also be interesting to end the first book with, the two of them arrive in the new place and describe their first impressions. And then the second book could start with sometime before
Uh-huh.
they arrive in the new place. So the reader gets to know the new place from the
Sure.
new
Sure.
place's inhabitants' perspective.
Sure.
And then suddenly the new people arrive and they get to see the new people from the inhabitants'
Sure.
perspective,
Sure.
right?
Sure. I love
And
that.
then
I
at
love it.
some point
That's
down the
lovely.
line, we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
mix
Yeah.
it up and have both
Yeah.
perspectives,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Sure.
But I think that would be quite interesting. And in this way, we
Yeah.
could bring in all the different, yeah, sort of cultural differences, preconceptions, but
Mhm.
also cultural similarities, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's one thing. So we usually are very quick to see the differences, and why would they be different, right? Um,
Mhm.
but for some reason, we don't really see the similarities, although usually there are a lot more
Mhm.
similarities than differences, right? But we're kind of primed to to do that. Anyway,
I mean,
just a few
it
ideas.
just makes me think as well if there is, because we've spoken about this like two species on one planet, and
Mm.
potentially to have there's like maybe even the similarity of say mammals when mammals meet, or the that that these two maybe evolutionary splits have happened, and I don't know this.
Oh yeah, we
I mean, I
did talk
think
about that. Yeah. Sorry.
that that if this is because I love this idea that there's this sort of like there's this generational thing where there has been the splits, and potentially what that could have happened was that you know you had this sort of community that all these explorers that have gone out, and then like a geological something has happened where you know a river has like either flowed across where it split them up, and then you can't, and there's no connection, and like maybe 30 or 40,000 years later they've developed separately and have become different, to also then match the environments. But also I think if there is this idea of say the second species, which is sort of the you know that has the tentacles and stuff of it, then I think there's even more of an encouragement of like looking past what those differences are, and then you know the way that sort of initially I would think about it is to create some sort of an external factor that brings them together. So there's originally they meet, and then there's definitely like neither one knows really which is if this is a safe space, and
Mm.
there's not much trust that sort of happens, but then some sort of like you know, again, I think I'm on the sort of the river sort of flowing through, or like there's a sandstorm that happens, and they have to find cover, and through this secondary adventure, figure out that there is one of them saves the other one, or whatever it might be,
Mm.
and then sort of maybe I think the cultural aspect. Like I think for me the most interesting part of it is this anthropological idea of how a culture would develop. Um,
Mm.
and could you tell me a little bit more about the frameworks as well?
Yeah, I wonder what did you so which frameworks? The
Oh, so
intercultural ones I noticed.
I mean yeah. So the one that you were talking about, the culture ones, just in terms of that email that I'd sent, what I was kind of in my mind, I thought that maybe there was something like a like I don't know why I picture it as a mind map of this is the species and this is how sort of the language would develop, but then also you'd have these like offshoots of sort of different cultures that would develop differently based on their sort of like if they were living in a mountain, then they would probably be eating this type of food, have this type of language, and I think I generally sort of picture the difference between, say, mountain people and valley people. This idea of like being separated, not being conquered because you live in a mountain, having an isolated development of your culture, much far less intermingling of sort of your of trade and so forth, and how these sort of cultures in isolation develop, and then it's just a beautiful thing because then it's nothing's in really in isolation, and you know and how this could happen on a planet like this where either like people who predominantly live like maybe deep underground, like on the surface, who have found ways of sort of surviving above ground. Again, I kind of really stuck on the above ground below ground
Yeah.
part, but yes, yeah,
I
sorry.
I think I get what you mean. So there's no framework like that.
Okay,
Um, and I think for our purposes, it wouldn't necessarily be useful anyway because we build it. We built this framework.
sure,
So you say, you know, if they live in a mountainous area, they might be isolated because there isn't much trade. But what if they can fly? They don't
sure,
care then, right?
sure,
So
sure,
it's something we develop, and that's
sure.
why I had recommended this beautiful book by Ursula Le Guin, Always
Uh-huh.
Coming
I have
Home.
written,
It is
I have
it is
written, yeah.
quite a chunky one, and I think it may not be necessary to actually read the whole thing. I mean, I have and I
Uh-huh.
enjoyed it,
Sure.
but in it, she basically describes an invented culture, and
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
it comes with stories, traditional
Uh-huh.
stories from that culture. It comes with recipes. It comes with dances. It comes with songs. It has, oh, what's that? Wait. So there are things like what they wore in the valley,
Uh-huh.
what they ate.
Importantly, there is the audiobook. So
There
it's
should be,
23 hours, which is perfect. It's a good like
that's
that's a good
long,
weekend.
yeah.
That's a good weekend audiobook for me.
But it's
Always.
so it also has some, so it has a glossary and a vocabulary as well, because it
Uh-huh.
has its own language, but there isn't
Uh-huh.
that much of the language. And there are some drawings as well, for example, of, flowers that that people rely on in that imaginary culture, the imaginary flowers. Um,
Amazing.
I think I also saw somewhere, I don't know, so examples of their art and all sorts of things. Um,
Fantastic. That's perfect. I mean, like
a
I
map.
think this will give me a really good grounding because I think my mind is already in the world. So to have a framework within which to be able to like place things would
Yeah.
be fantastic.
Yeah, and just so I guess I just go what yeah, I just place myself in that world and think what is it going to be like? And the more information I can find, the more helpful it is. That's why initially I just threw myself into, many of the links that you sent. So I think I watched all of them and then found
Mhm.
additional things that I could check out for, locked planets and what things would be like and
Mhm.
so on. Even though sometimes there was conflicting information, wasn't there? There was one
Sure.
that said, oh, because everything like the wind currents will be predictable and not so strong, that's why it's probably easier to get into space and to come up with space flight. And then there was another source which said the winds will be so strong and violent,
That's
there's no way
sure.
anything can fly. And I
Sure.
thought, well, I don't know.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but then
I think
maybe
we
we can,
would
maybe there are areas where there's more wind and areas where there's less wind. Or, you know,
sure, sure.
anyway.
Yeah, like there's a part of me that wants to take a little bit maybe more creative license of creating this world that would be like I for me I just have it as a really beautiful place in my mind,
Mm.
and like somewhat idyllic maybe, which is I think not, which is probably if we probably ever go there, it's probably not the case. It's probably not as idyllic as I have it in my mind. Uh, and
But we're not doing that, right? I mean, we're dreaming something up, and
Sure, 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 sure.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I'd also love to. I've got a couple of interesting meetings happening with some architects over the next couple of weeks, and we're trying to kind of like trying to maybe also within the projects look at sort of these different themes of, architecture, food, and kind of bring people together to think about how we would represent architecture or how we would represent food and so forth. And I think from the architecture perspective, I'd love to be able to just have these conversations around sort of like what architecture could look like on another planet, specifically like these sorts of planets, um,
Mm.
and 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 maybe get like I think there's this there is a there I met an architect working on moon architecture, um, and just really sort of interesting how even our thinking about it now has changed from like very sort of utilitarian, like this is the airlock, this is this, and it's just this bubble, into like things that are, if you're going to live there for your whole life, it's got to be habitable as well as obviously, secure and safe. And kind of how to create that thing of like, a lot of it is sort of around sort of where they keep water. And sort of this idea of having quite large structures where they're in sort of this circular thing, and then you've got the water as quite a fairly deep pool, which is in there's one section of it which is specifically kept clean for drinking water, but then they also then filter out to sort of another section which is sort of more of a, it is a lot of plants and animals, and that's what keeps it clean as a natural environment. And then having sort of a secondary supplementary place where if anything that gets contaminated, you can kind of bring fresh water in, and then having this sort of natural convection that would happen. And then interestingly enough, there's a lot of sort of look at, say, creating kind of anthill type structures, and how an anthill has this really sort of natural way of creating cooling, because it's got the structure, it's got a central column that basically what happens is air flows over it, that air then comes in. And what they do in some buildings in the Middle East is they basically split that air up. So you've got air coming in on one side, and then because of the heat, there's a chamber at the bottom which allows that heat to escape all the way from the bottom, and that heat then gets pushed up and pushed out the other side and kind of creates this
Mm.
passive cooling structure. So I'm hoping to kind of explore that a little bit more with them in terms of like what some like highly like harsh environments, what sort of architecture could could be, and then hopefully get a couple of pictures as well in terms of what they think
Yeah, that'll be
as well.
interesting. Nice.
Hmm. Um,
And how to make it aesthetically pleasing. And what does aesthetically
hmm.
pleasing mean for
Sure, sure, sure,
people? Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering now. So shall I stick with the tentacle people, or shall I? In my head, they've kind of
Uh,
developed from um, what they're called, cephalopods, octopi kind of
sure,
type
sure.
creatures that kind of lived in the underground oceans of that
Hmm.
place, and then slowly kind of developed into land creatures through the very extensive cave system that there is,
Wow, love that.
and they
Love that.
started develop like changing some of their tentacles changed into walking tentacles basically,
Uh,
and others kind of operate as arms and whatever they need them for. Um, and that's why I had this idea, if they continue to live mainly underground, they have easy access to these caves and to the water there. That means
uh-huh.
they can still, swim a lot, but also have maybe access to clean drinking water, which will be perhaps specific caves that maybe have some
Mhm.
kind of, I don't know, right or something around them that
Mhm.
kind of means that over the generations it's always being kept clean because it's, I don't know, maybe it's sacred or
Well,
something.
if
I
there's,
don't know.
I think if there's a filtration, if the earth is naturally filtering water through the soil, you will get quite filtered water. I think as long as there's sort of a pool that then has a pool below it, if there's sort of a flow of that water, then
Mm,
you would generally, I think, have very clean water in that. But I could check that with maybe a geologist as well.
yeah.
Um,
But
I think
anyway,
my
so I
answer
I
would
could.
be,
Hmm?
hmm?
Sorry. No, so I was wondering, so I could develop that rather than have a civilization that's developed from a common
Hmm.
ancestor. I think maybe that would work better then, because then we have two civilizations that are just very, very different, as
Yeah,
we
I mean, I
did
think my
discuss very early on, right? I remember that
hmm.
now. Yeah.
I mean, I think my answer would be wherever your imagination wants to take you. I think uh, that's the that's what I think with this particular project as well. Like wherever you
Mm,
find it most interesting. I just wanted to ask you. I started watching a um, talk about I'll see if I can find him now. Part of the Harvard speaking series. Let me see if I can. I should actually have it in my other history. Essentially, the speaker had written a book, and the idea was around language being like almost 2 million years old instead of being like wherever we think it, however old we think sort of language is. And then I think it was very, very dry, and I only got through about 10 minutes of it. But I wanted to see if you'd heard the name of the author. Um, should be close. Let's see. But yeah, I mean, I think if that is where sort of the imagination is taking you, I think it'll just add a really beautiful interest to the book in terms of like having these two species. Um, now totally. Oh, it was because it wasn't online. Uh,
Yeah, I'll see. Because also in terms of language, it might be interesting because I think because they tend to have beaks,
mhm.
and it might limit the way, or well, not limit, but language would just develop differently. But then they have lots of tentacles, so they might have a very elaborate language that is
Oh
both sound
yeah,
and sign, right? So
sure,
both could be
sure.
combined. Yeah, I see.
Daniel Everett, The Invention of Human Language. I don't know if you've ever heard how language began.
I've heard the name before. Didn't he work
He
with?
he started off
Oh,
his talk by saying that he was definitely not within the mainstream of academic thought on this one.
well, he says there's no such thing as a universal grammar, and that immediately, I think, makes him a very, a, yeah, I just wholeheartedly agree with him immediately. Oh, yes, endangered languages, that's where I know him from. So
Okay,
he's worked with endangered languages. That's where I heard the name.
because I think I find it interesting that he's an EIOU, that some people think that even the human mouth is sort of has evolved to say those sounds so much that there are these sort of core. I think the tribe that he worked with in the Amazon, I think their language is based on those particular three vowels. Um,
Mm,
but then they also have part of the language is also based on pitch as well. So there was three vowels, and then there was like maybe two pitches or three pitches. And it's just, I mean, yeah, I would like to watch. If you do know any good lectures on sort of the history of language, that that would be nice to watch as well.
like evolution of language or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
history in general.
I think the evolution, or just the,
Yeah.
yeah, the sort of the kind of again maybe like a framework of how language could develop, and
Yeah. I'm just sorry. I'm
no,
just
no, no, no,
looking
no, no.
in my search
It's
box and thought maybe I find something immediately, but mm, not really. I would avoid anything that has Noam Chomsky in it because that will just be very discouraging,
okay, okay.
and leaves very little room for, and is probably wrong anyway. I mean, that's anyways. Yeah, but that's my opinion.
Sure.
But
I mean, I trust your opinion.
yeah, it's so there's quite a divide in linguistics between, especially between sociolinguists and
Mm-hmm.
everyone on that side, which includes anthropology, so anthropological linguistics and all that. And a lot of people also working on endangered languages belong to that. And we don't really believe in this universal grammar thing, because especially people working in the field and documenting languages, they find so many different things and such a great variety in language that it's really, it's not possible to kind of summarize under an umbrella of universal grammar, for example, or universal features. There are some things that a lot of languages share and some things that very few languages share, and that's fine. Nobody disputes that. But this idea that all the languages have the same underlying grammar, which is a mental grammar, it's a sort of cognitive concept. That's why some colleagues also call Noam Chomsky not a linguist, but a psychologist, which I find maybe a bit harsh. But this is what it's about. So the idea is, we all have this cognitive structure, and it's the same for everyone, and that makes every language fundamentally in its very basics the same. But then when you look at the research that tries to prove it, very often the researchers from the beginning know what they want to find. And because this is what they want to find, they usually find it. Or they try to set up very valid experiments, right? Or very, very valid methods, but they're set up in a way that they're probably going to find what they're looking for. And that makes it always a bit, to me, it's a bit, I don't know, I don't really sympathize with this approach, right? So I'd like to just, take the data and look what I find, rather than already have in my head what I want to find.
Sure.
That's a bit, I don't know. Anyway.
I know also not book related, but this project with the Scouts is starting to move forward. I just had a meeting with StoryCorp about 2 hours ago, and they're looking like they're going to sort of come into sort of a collaboration with us on the story side. But one of the things we would like to do is do like a endangered language, or not necessarily endangered language specifically, but kind of a language documentation. So it's an audio archive, and there's going to be a story part of it. There's going to be a music part of it. There's going to be a sound part, and then we've sort of put in there to do a language part. And this idea of having Scouts, being able to sort of have a framework for Scouts to go out and record languages inside maybe their own community, but then also being encouraged to go out and record languages that aren't their home language as well. And I wonder if you sort of had any sort of ideas on how to do it. And currently what we're thinking is potentially even to have, say, to make it maybe a valuable archive, is to have, it'll be app based. So potentially if we're looking at, say, to stop people all going out and just recording somebody saying hello in a different language, is to have like a whole bunch of things that we would want to be said, and then being able to build up, once that has been said and once it's been recorded 100 times, you're going out and that's on the app has shown that has been like covered, and then you can go out and record something else on the app, and then sort of build up this sort of archive. And I wonder if that is even possible or works. And that's sort of how we're more thinking about the sound aspect. So like, we don't want everybody going out and recording the sound of water. We want to build up a database of like maybe 1,000 or 2,000 sounds from different places in the world.
Yeah, it is possible to do that. I know of a project that was conducted in Wales a few years ago, and that was it was also app-based, and people were invited to just record everyday conversations in Welsh, and that then contributed to a corpus of contemporary Welsh language. And that was all over Wales and lots of different areas because there are all these different dialects as well. And the idea was to also capture how new speakers of Wales, new speakers in Wales, you use the Welsh language, right? Because there are differences.
Sure.
They include more sort of Anglicisms and things like that. And that worked quite well. So it's definitely possible to have an app where people record things and then send it over.
Yeah.
And then it could
Let me
be
see if I can
archived
find it.
in the corpus.
Wales.
It was called, where I can send you the link, because I'm
Super.
friends with the people who ran this.
Oh, if you could, yes, if we could connect to them, I mean, I think that would be like just really, really special because, you know, if they have a program that has worked as
The
well,
chat.
and I think specifically from a funding perspective, if we're able to like take a program and expand it, then it's going to be much easier.
Yeah.
I've learned that it's impossible to reinvent the wheel whatever we do. There's no, we
Yeah, shouldn't.
can't start from the beginning on anything.
It's not a meeting until my cat has disappeared. Has appeared. Sorry. So yeah, so yeah, I can get in touch with Dawn and ask her about it. Dawn Knight was one of the principal investigators.
Amazing.
What shall I tell her to get? Shall I just put you all in
If you
touch,
could,
or how do you do
yeah,
that?
if you could just the introduction would be great, and I can give details of the project and kind of what we're looking to do, and we would definitely always be sort of highlighting their work as the original sort of successful project, and you know and then potentially hopefully like use that as the template, and yeah, that would be incredible. I think, you know, with the book as well, like I will kind of update from our side. Like I also I would love to just spend just a month or two just writing and doing nothing else. And I
Yeah,
kind of had this dream in my head of like if I sail around the world, at least I'll have that time to just write stuff. But life does tend to get in the way.
yeah, exactly. No, that's why I'm quite. I mean, this is really fortunate timing because I'll be away the next 2 weeks visiting family, and it's a bit, I stay at my father's place. He doesn't have internet because he doesn't do. Yeah, I know it's feeding time, isn't it? He doesn't do sort of modern technologies and stuff, right? I mean, he's how was he 80, 82, 83 years old now. So, I mean, I have phone data. I can check my emails if I need to. But other than that, I can't really do much work, and I shouldn't because I'll be on leave, right, on annual leave.
Sure.
But it's usually then also a good time because it draws me away from this place where I'm surrounded by work, and I can think of something else. So I'll use the time to think of the culture and maybe build the culture first before I start writing anything else. But so I will write
Relaxation.
the sketch of the culture
Uh-huh.
and maybe make some notes on possible language communication and all these kind of things. I'll do that. And also going back to the language thing, I remember I was supposed to send you also details about language archives.
Yeah.
I just need to.
I think you did send me something.
Yeah. But I didn't send you the link I wanted to. So there's a.
Okay.
What I need to do is I need to go through some of the literature I was reading over the last few weeks, and then just write out all the different archives that were mentioned in them. So there are several. So I know there's one held at SOAS, so the in London.
Sure.
There
Yeah.
there are some others which are sort of privately funded and so on. So I'll
Hmm.
yeah I'll go through those.
Super,
But
super,
yeah,
super. Yeah, I
perfect.
mean, I think relaxation first if you're away,
Yeah,
and then if you're inspired, then sure. If it's relaxing to do it, I find it relaxing. I
it
find
is
it,
actually. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
find
yeah, yeah.
it's nice to it's a nice way to think of something else, and
Sure,
I mean,
sure,
who doesn't
sure.
like to dream up their own world and take
Exactly, exactly,
adventures and all
exactly.
that.
I have
Yeah.
this, like weird thing, like if that's where first contact does come from, and maybe it's we're fairly close, and somebody's like, well, like somebody from that planet's like, wow, that's yeah, you're a little bit off here, you're a little bit off there, rest of it's fun.
Yeah.
So, Bettina, I think I'm gonna grab a quick little bit of dinner. I've got another meeting now at 7, and then another
Oh,
meeting at
wow.
8 as well. It's like, I think it's
That's a
also
lot of meetings.
because it is. I think because of the like as I wasn't gonna go to this other 7 because we were gonna meet. Um,
Mm,
it's basically the cohort for the funding. It's basically like we are on this funding program. So myself,
mm,
myself and Heather, and then if I can't make it, then she goes. But it's, I mean, it's I kind of sit in the background and then watch. But yeah, it's a bit of a. I think this particular time, I think as soon as these projects start to go fully, I think it'll actually be a bit easier because then we'll have a project manager and we'll have somebody to kind of
mm.
manage that side. But it's been really so like it's been I think this week in particular was a really good week speaking to potential partners and now I think even this from this conversation, I think from the language perspective, I've been finding very good responses from partners who have sort of a clear alignment. So it's been really sort of sound recording equipment manufacturers. But I think
Mm.
I'd like, from the language perspective, potentially speak to organizations like Babel and the other sort of language apps to see if there's some sort of collaboration that they would like to do. I think that would be
Yeah.
that's my next one. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
It's fun. It's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
is. All right. Well, I'll put you in touch with Dawn, and I'll do that
Super.
pretty much straight away. So I don't, well, maybe I feed my cat first, but then I'll
Sure.
do that after
Sure.
that. Um, and yeah, I'll also do the language archive thing. But
Super. Super.
yeah,
And just thank you as well. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I really
that
appreciate
was
it. It's like
fun.
it's really special to not be doing it alone and also to be doing it with somebody who is so distinguished and knowledgeable about this particular field. And yeah,
Well,
no,
let's
it's
see. Let's see what the result is.
but thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right. Well,
Super.
have a nice rest of the evening. Good luck with the
And you
next
too.
meetings.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.